Today, we're going to talk about a very important topic, which is how to choose the right design agency for your business. I've seen a lot of businesses make this mistake about just choosing from a ranking list and choosing the best one and going with it, and actually ending up with bad results. In fact, in my previous agency, we had a lot of clients that were actually coming to us after having worked with another design agency. And that's not surprising to me in retrospect. So here is a video where I'm going to talk about how to go about choosing the right design agency for you. There was this one time when I wanted to get into the sport of biking, riding bicycles, and went to this friend of mine who actually sold bicycles, and I asked him to recommend something for me. To my surprise, he actually recommended something that was quite expensive. Not that I couldn't afford it, but it was just something that I hadn't anticipated spending that much on. And so I asked him, like, don't you think, for somebody who's just getting into the sport, should I be buying something this expensive? He said, if you buy the wrong bicycle, you're not going to like the sport. So if you're actually serious about getting into the right sport, buy the best bike you can afford, and that'll make you love the sport. So it's got a lot of parallels with what we are talking about today, because quite often businesses end up making a choice based on costs or any other number of other factors, right? And what ends up happening is that they end up choosing the wrong design agency. And the output that they get from that, they look at the product and say that the product doesn't work. Whereas if a different agency had actually executed the same particular project, you might have actually ended up with a successful outcome. And then your business strategy that you would have based on the outcome of this would actually be very different. So let's get into talking about what is the right way to go about choosing your design agency, because it's not really obvious. So before we go further, let's get this one question which keeps coming up all the time, which is, should I go with a freelancer or should I hire a design agency? There are very few circumstances under which I would recommend hiring a freelancer. And that has to do with, if you're extremely cost conscious, if it's just a one-off project that you want to try out, it's not a long-term approach that you have, or if you have such a clear idea in your head as to how the application should work out, that you can actually hire a freelancer and do this. For all other circumstances, I would absolutely recommend working with an agency. There are limitations that come in because of working with a freelancer, which is, first of all, their availability is not going to be as broad as an agency's availability. Second thing is, you're entirely dependent on the wisdom of one individual, whereas a design agency is actually consulting with you. A lot of the work has to do with debating approaches to solving a problem. And it's always not always a choice between right and wrong. It's about which is a better fit. The right choice over there can be made only when things have been hashed out, to argued and debated. So when you're working with an individual, you're not getting as powerful a solution as you would if you worked with a team, right? So for these reasons, I would actually not recommend going with a freelancer if you can afford to go with a design agency instead. So one of the biggest mistakes I've seen businesses make is not understanding the role of UX design. UX designer will actually translate a business idea into the form of an application. The closest equivalence that I've seen is an architect on a construction site, right? So they are the ones that have imagined what the building ought to be, and the construction team will actually execute based on that plan. The designers actually trying to balance the customer's needs, the business's objectives, and also deal with the constraints of technology and trends, while also being sensitive to the brand values. It's a difficult task. It's got a lot to do with juggling a lot of things all at once. So it's not everybody that can do this, and it's definitely not everybody that can do this well. So just have this as in the back of your mind when you're thinking about why you need to hire. Also, the UX design has played multiple roles within an organization. So first of all, you can use it for prototyping, but there are multiple other roles that UX design can actually play. It can be a vital tool to reduce costs in software development, because it's the old carpenter's adage, measure twice, cut once. By planning everything out on paper, as it were, you are actually able to visualize exactly how the end application is going to be coming out. So you worked out all the difficulties, all the details on paper, and when you hand it over to the development team, they can execute it really easily. There's no guesswork, there's no gotchas, there's no scenarios that you haven't thought about at that particular time. This is the most efficient way of keeping the costs, controlled. Another reason why UX design is to understand what are the budgets that are required in order to develop the software. So unless you have these plans all ironed out, the software team is only going to give you estimates, and estimates, have a lot of buffer if the plans didn't exist. So with these plans which come out of UX design, you can actually end up getting a very accurate estimate of how much it would cost you to develop. These are some core principles, but there are ancillary reasons why UX design is actually useful as well. So in one of our clients' meetings, I was very surprised to see this was an insurance company, and we were having our discovery session, one of the initial few discovery sessions. And yes, I knew that this application that we were developing was actually far-reaching and kind of like spread across the company. But I was extremely surprised when I saw 12 to 14 people actually walk into the conference room representing different departments within the company. And what was surprising is that everybody's inputs were actually being sought by one that was handling the software. He wanted everybody's inputs so that they could all contribute to the software. Now, they were doing it to get to make sure that the software is addressing everybody's needs. But you can also see that they were actually getting a buy-in from everyone on the software because everybody contributed to it. One of the biggest challenges to software succeeding in an environment is to get adoption. And within an organization, getting adoption has a lot to do with the politics of the organization as well. So what this person actually did was to actually get people's buy-in right from the get-go by getting their inputs in their inputs into the design right from the beginning. He was making sure that the software is actually going to get used by the various teams within the company and make the software successful. This wasn't something I had thought of, but it was very surprising to learn that one of the other use cases is to unify everybody's opinions. So in another project where we were working with a hospital, the teams were all brought in not so much from the perspective of seeking their inputs. They were brought in early on to show what the vision of the CEO was. So we did a lot of demos from within the company to various departments within the team, solely for the purpose of making everybody understand where the company was headed in the future. So UX can be used for this purpose as well. So one of the surefire ways of not succeeding is to not prepare a good brief. I think in a lot of cases what I've seen is the briefs are either too poor, as in it's too many things left to chance, or too detailed, which is also a problem. So what you want to do is actually to be in the middle zone where you're actually being very specific when it comes to the business goals, but not being too prescriptive when it comes to the solutions. Because what you're doing here is actually working with the design team in order for them to come up with the solutions for you. And if you walk in saying that this is the solution, I need this application, this iOS, as well as this particular website, that may be the solution that you anticipated for the problem, but you're not allowing the team to actually come up with a different solution in case they think there's a better one. So there's another story that comes to mind. We were pitching our ideas of how to solve this particular business problem this client had asked us for. And I had a slide where the architecture of the system that we had designed was being presented to the client. And one of the team members of the client actually piped in and started saying, the architecture is incorrect. But the CEO, knowing how better, he said, hang on, he asked him politely to stop and let us finish. And we actually solved their problem, and in fact removed one extra additional layer that they had assumed was a requirement, but we handled it in a much more efficient way. And those are the kind of possibilities that you want to allow for the UX design team to come up with, right? So just make sure that you're not being too prescriptive of what the solution ought to be. So if I was to give you an example over here, let's say you have an e-commerce website, right? And the problem that you're seeing is that people are purchasing products from one particular department and missing out products from other departments. So you might state that as the exact problem that you want to solve. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to say that there ought to be a basket, and the suggestions from other departments should come in within the basket and things like that. Leave that to the design team to come up with, right? Let them figure out, let them understand what the system is, let them understand who the users are, and then come up with the right solution for you. So when it comes to finding the potential agency that you want to work with, the best way to find a good fit for you is to find someone through a referral. The advantage there is that if you are getting a referral from another, a friend of yours or anybody like that, they have actually worked with the agency that they're going to be recommending to you, and they've seen that agency perform over a period of time. So you're getting a much better quality offer than if you were to go look online. But let's admit it, that's not always possible. You might not always have a good referral coming to you, and you might have to refer to a website like Clutch or something else, where you'll see a list of agencies and you'll need to pick from them. So let's talk more about that and the kind of mistakes that people make over here. And the first one of the biggest mistakes that you could possibly be making is placing too high a value on the ranking. Our agency was ranked among the top 20 in the country and within the top 100 in the world. So it isn't a matter of sour grapes. We were ranked pretty well and we got a lot of incoming leads because of it. But I still want to tell you the truth that the ranking resolutions aren't high enough for you to be able to make a judgment clearly saying that number 30 is good and number 40 is worse. I don't think it works like that. I think you'll see that there's a quality difference between number 30 and maybe number 150. But 30 and 31, 30 and 50, I don't think is going to be as much of a variation as you imagine it to be. So placing too much weight on the rank is not going to be useful to you. What you want to look for is a good fit for you, right? So that's what I would ask you to focus on. So don't be blinded by the ranks. Another dimension for you to consider is the local versus remote agencies. Remote agencies do work. That's not a challenge at all. I mean, that's a given. I have seen a great amount of success coming from working with somebody remotely. And post the pandemic, a lot of agencies had to go online, and we've executed a lot of projects ourselves online, completely online. And it was very successful, so there's no strike against it. But if you had a choice of picking between a good agency that was remote and a good agency that was local, I would pick the local. This is only for comfort factors. There are stages within UX design where you're going to be brainstorming, you're going to be debating ideas and so on. And that's not very conducive in a Zoom kind of environment where you're doing video conferences and trying to do this, only through those methods. There's a lot more that happens when you're in person, and you get to know the agency better. You get to get a better feel for them. So that's something that I would highly recommend that you do. Definitely try and find somebody local. But if that's not possible, don't worry about it. Let this not be a constraint. You can definitely work with somebody remotely and be able to execute things really well, execute projects really well. Another aspect that I've seen the clients do quite often is a requirement for somebody to have the industry experience. I'll tell you a story of ours. We worked with one of the biggest, glasses manufacturer in India, and we had no experience working with anybody else making glasses. But that kind of helped us because we approached everything anew. We weren't blinded by the industry blinders. that one would actually get in case you've seen a particular industry over and over again, and you kind of like have a certain idea that this is the only idea that works. In fact, in our project, we actually borrowed ideas from the jewelry industry. We had done another project for a jeweler, and the ways in which we promoted products over there had a lot to do with the ways in which glasses had to be promoted. There were a lot of parallels between these two industries, which we only noticed because we came in from the outside. So a lot of times an external UX agency has been brought in to come with a fresh perspective. So making that a requirement, saying that do you have this industry experience, is actually not as useful as one would imagine. Unless you're in a very technical field, which is has to do a lot with science and research and stuff, there I would see that having a prior industry experience would help. But otherwise, when you're hiring an external agency, you might actually benefit from them not knowing the industry well and approaching everything anew. So let the fact that somebody doesn't have industry experience be not a strike against them. All right. I did mention this earlier. It is about finding somebody with value alignment. A lot of design has to do with making a lot of micro decisions, right? And having an agency that aligns with your values ahead of time actually saves you from making a lot of these decisions and making a lot of these fixes that you would otherwise have to do. Let me give you an example. So let's take a login form. So if the user typed in the wrong password, they're not going to be able to proceed. They might be presented with an error message. Now, what does the error message say? It could say, you typed in the wrong password, please review it and fix it, right? Or it could say the password is incorrect, please review to proceed. These two aren't so far off from each other, but one sentence definitely blames the user for the mistake they've made, and the other one does not. Can you see the subtle differences between these two approaches? And the agency that you end up working with might actually choose one or the other. And this isn't because they believe one is better than the other, it's just what they believe in their worldview. So if you chose the right agency that fits your brand values as well, these kind of micro decisions you don't have to worry about. You don't have to go and review all the language that the agency has provided and get in there and try to fix these problems. So make sure to choose the agency that shares your values so that the software that they produce will actually feel like yours. Great. One point I really want to highlight over here is the visual brilliance that some of the agencies will present you can be blinding. So you got to look past the visual brilliance. So you might have some stunning graphics and stunning positioning and such, but UX is more than the visual aspect to it. There's an entire interaction layer. So just cut through the noise that is produced by the visuals and see whether the actual interactions, the architecture, the systems, and the problems that they've solved are actually valuable. So don't be taken entirely by the visuals. The visuals come as a secondary aspect. They're important, but it's the secondary aspect in my opinion. A superlative experience has more to do with thinking about the problem and solving it in a much more efficient way than what the visuals will compensate for. Yeah. All right. So you've shortlisted a whole bunch of them, and you actually have let's say about 10 different agencies that you might want to work with. So what I suggest you do is reach out to them and ask them to start sending you proposals. They might actually ask you to give them a brief, so have that brief ready and send it across to them and ask them to develop a proposal and get back to you. Now, a good agency will make the right assumptions for all the missing pieces that aren't there in the brief and will actually send you a proposal based on that. A bad agency will require every little detail to be spelled out and before sending out the proposal to you. Another quality is an agency that knows its process will actually get you the proposal in time. They will spend a little time and actually produce the right proposal for you. What you want to watch out for the agencies that miss deadlines or for submission. because that's a sign that they don't know their process very well, or they just are too busy to be able to handle one more project. So just pay attention to these small details. Then come the quality of the proposal itself, right? In the proposal, just look for what the payment schedules are, right? I just got to tell you a little story over here. I had this architect friend, and they wanted to actually, an architect has to do inspections once the construction teams have been doing their work and so on. So the question was, how do you evaluate whether the construction has been done well in a high-rise building? Do you go to each floor and examine the stuff, examine the construction work on each floor? So what this person said was, actually, no, there's something called inspection points, right? So if you want to evaluate the quality of construction of a high-rise, what you actually do is go to the basement and look at the pillars over there. If there are any faults in the construction in any of the floors of the building, you'll actually see cracks on the pillars. So these are called inspection points. So in a similar way, if you want to identify whether you're working with a quality agency, you want to understand whether they know the process really well. And that's going to be expressed very clearly in the way they're going to ask for payments from you. So just look for the payment schedules section within the proposal. And if they know their process really well, they would have broken down the payments into a very sensible 3 payments or 4 payment structure, depending on the size of your project. If you don't see that section, it's a clear problem that the agency doesn't know their business really well. And the second thing that you want to look for is the clarity with which the proposal itself has been written. A UX agency's job is to simplify any complex process, and it begins with how well the proposal has been written. Have they communicated and answered all the questions that you have in your mind as a client ahead of time through the proposal? Or do you have to keep going back to them asking for more and more questions? There might be some things which are missing, that's a given, but how many details are actually missing in that proposal? That actually will tell you how good this agency that you're working with is. So that's your first level of filtration. But there's a second stage. So let's say 5 agencies have qualified after looking at their proposals. You've knocked them out, you've knocked off a few because they're too expensive, or you knocked off a few because they're too, the quality wasn't good enough. For whatever reason, you shortlisted, let's say, about 5 people here. So 5 different agencies here. So now for you to assess between these 5, you can ask them a few questions. So there's usually a proposal review stage where the agency might reach out to you and say, can I walk you through the proposal that I've sent you? So at that stage, you might want to ask these questions. I feel there are these 4 questions that you could potentially ask, and that should actually reveal a lot about the agency as well. So first and foremost, how do they measure success? Like we spoke about earlier, design isn't like an expression, it's not an art form. Design is about solving a business problem, right? It's about finding the right solution. So how do you measure your design and the success of your design? So for me, it's very clear that the design is successful if it's solving the business problem that you laid out for them. That's the clear measure of success. Now, if the agency does not know the business they're in, then they will not have a clear answer for this question. How do they measure success? So just watch out for that, right? So you can also ask this question of whether they've done work in your field, and if they have, they'll show you the work that they've done. But the interesting thing is actually in the situation where they have not done work in your field. So in that case, you'll ask them what their approach is going to be. And there are multiple ways to approach the solution or approach a new field. And what you want to listen to is how clearly they are able to communicate how they would go into a green field, right? How they would go into something they've not dealt with before. So that will actually help you understand how often they've actually found themselves in this situation and whether they'll be able to, actually solve this problem. The next question will actually tell you whether they see their work as impacting a business or not. So you might want to ask them how their work has actually impacted a business that they worked with before. And if there are an agency that typically just works on an assembly line thing where a sales team will keep making the sales and bringing leads, and the design team just executes well the bare minimum and tosses it over the wall per se to the client, and they don't really care whether it's actually created an impact or not, they won't have a good answer to this question. So just ask this question from that perspective. If they have their work in the right way, they would have actually been curious about how much impact it actually created in the client's business. So that will actually show whether they're being indifferent or just doing the work to pay the bills, or do they actually care about the work they do. And the final question you can ask is, what has been the biggest reasons for causing for delays in past projects? It needn't be said, but if any agency actually tells you they've never seen delays in their project, that they're lying. Every agency has dealt with it. Any large system with multiple actors is going to face some difficulties. Nothing is ever going to run extremely smoothly. There are going to be projects where everything went really well, but for sure they've faced problems in certain projects where things have not gone well. So what you want to understand here is whether they've actually done a post-mortem analysis of that failed project and seen what went wrong, and have they taken and learned lessons from that and applied it to their process thereon. So that is what you're looking for over here. How well they've thought about that problem, and how they've identified it, and how they've rectified their process in order to handle those kind of situations in the future. So that's going to show you the maturity of the agency that you're working with as well. All right, you've finally shortlisted all your designers, design agencies, and you've come up with a good list here. You might be choosing between two agencies at this particular point. So yeah, I'm gonna just give you some tips on how to choose one of the two, right? How to get to that one. So there are some red flags that you should watch out for, and this is pretty much applicable across the entire process, but in case you come to this stage, see if these red flags are actually applicable to you, so that making the choice becomes easier. So just be extremely careful of design agencies that overuse. The job of a UX designer is to actually simplify things so that they can be understood, or be able to clearly communicate, or simplify a process so that anybody can actually do it. The overuse of jargon is an indicator of the opposite. They're trying to obfuscate and hide behind these jargon in order to feel, to hide something that they don't understand. So I am very wary of, within my team, whoever just keeps talking about the processes they've learned, or names of process and things like that. If they're not able to explain their work in simple English, it's a clear indicator for me that this is somebody I don't want to work with. The second thing is, if they don't question or are not curious about understanding why you are executing this particular project, that is a clear sign for me that this is somebody who's just taking on projects to just pay the bills. So if they're being a UX designer is it's a mindset. One cannot help themselves but to think in this way. If they're naturally designers, they will be curious as to understanding the motivation, because that's what they're trying to solve for. They want to understand what is it that you're trying to achieve. They want to get to the core of it, because that's what they're solving for. So if they've not been curious about and asked you questions to understand that, this is not an agency that is actually trying to win your project to actually do some interesting work. Definitely watch out for the agency that just starts giving you whatever you asked for without any questioning, or without any kind of pushback in any way in some situations. A good designer will have a perspective of how they want to execute stuff, and they're gonna try to explain it to you that this is the right way of doing things. I mean, of course, nobody's gonna keep going endlessly and constantly arguing with you. I hope that's not the case. But if they're not even attempted to push back even once and explain another perspective or why they were doing things, and end up just taking your suggestion and just giving it to you, That's another very bad sign, because you're hiring an agency for their thinking, their to be expressed, not so that you can tell them what to do, right? And for them to do it. You don't want pixel pushers. You want, actual designers thinking about your problem. The another red flag is one where the agency is extremely certain about the solution. They'll be like, I have the solution to your problem. No matter how much experience some agency has had in a certain field, every project is new and has to be approached as such. So even if I've executed 100 e-commerce projects, each of those projects have been different, because the particular customer base that each of them have been targeting is going to be different, has been different, and that actually necessitates an entirely different system to actually solve that problem. So if somebody says, I've done 100 e-commerce projects and have the right solution for you, this is exactly what you need to do, I'd be a little wary, because the best they can actually tell you is, I think I have the right solution. And I will approach it saying that with all my experience, I will give you the right solution, but we're going to have to test it to see whether it actually works. And unless they are waiting for the results of that test to understand whether that solution actually worked, it's being rather in saying that this is the right solution. So just watch out for somebody who expresses that level of certainty, right? And this is not as much of a red flag. This last quality is not as much of a red flag as it is a warning sign. So typically you're working with a UX design agency, and in the long term, you might have a 3-month project or 4 months project, but you will always want to actually come up with the next version of this project a little later down the road. So if they have financial discipline, they will actually be around for you to reach out to again down the road. If they're not, if a lot of agencies have founders who are not financially disciplined at all, and they might be coming from the arts. Not that artists aren't financially disciplined, it's just I don't think there's as much of an emphasis on financial discipline when you come from that field. So if they're not careful of making sure that their bills are paid, their lights are on and such, they're not going to be around for the long term, and it'll be actually difficult to find those people again. So if you are venturing on a project that might actually span 6 months or a year, or you look at the long-term future of this version 1, if there are multiple versions that you're going to actually end up building, you want to actually be working with an agency that's going to be around for the long term. This does not necessarily mean a large agency always. Even large agencies close down. So it's not about that. It's about whether they have expressed to you, that they are financially responsible. There was this one particular client that we had been working with. In my previous avatar, I ran a software company, and we had been developing this software. It was like a SaaS product, which we had just started reaching out to our clients for. And this, based on some feedback, we had to make some fixes, and this client had suggested it to us. So we said, okay, we're gonna turn off your billing for this particular month and until we get this fix in. And the client actually responded saying, first of all, what you're charging me is not a lot. I'm just gonna continue paying you. If I actually don't pay you and you're not going to be around tomorrow, I'd be the loser over here. So that actually stayed with me. So making sure that my lights are on, even if I didn't care for it, the client knew that he had to care for that, so that I would continue to be a vendor for him. So it's a similar kind of thing over here. If they are mindful of their finances, they will be around in the future. So it's just a sign, something that you should kind of like pay attention to see if they are going to be around for the long run. There has been another situation where I've seen where this client started working with this agency, and they actually shut down in the middle because they ran out of money. They couldn't execute that client's project. So, and that again happens quite a lot, had to do with the fact that they didn't have the financial discipline required to stay around. So you don't want to be finding yourself in that kind of a situation. So just make sure that you pay attention to this aspect as well, and start working with the right agency. You pay attention to this as well, so that you find the right agency for you. All right, so now we come into the budget considerations. This is a question that kind of comes up once in a while. I don't quite understand it as well as I should, but the concern comes from, have I left too much money on the table, right? So when you're hiring an agency, somebody within your organization might say, are we paying them too much? It's a bit of a ridiculous question, because if you like the output that this team produced, then that's the cost that you're going to have to pay, right? But there are some people that don't think, that think that you can get that kind of output by not paying as much. So to address that concern, I just want to kind of like talk about this one particular point. And so for you to estimate how much you should actually pay as a minimum, the following formula will actually help you. So any project typically has about 4 designers working on it. And what you can do is actually look up how much it would cost you to hire a designer on a yearly basis by looking at Glassdoor or any other job sites, right? UX designer with about 2 years of experience, how much would that cost you? Divide that by 12, you'll get your monthly salary, so to speak, right? And multiply that by 5, not 4, by 5. Because this team is going to comprise somebody with a lot more experience and somebody with a lot less experience as well. So this is an average that you can actually get. And not all 4 members are going to be working on a particular project 100% of the time. In my agency, I made sure that each designer actually worked on 2 projects. This was actually to prevent a burnout. Somebody cannot keep thinking about the same problem all the time. And just starting to work on a different problem will actually help you do both the projects really well, because the designers can get that kind of break that they need in order to actually perform their task really well. So it's not going to be 100% utilization either. So if you multiply that monthly salary by 5, you'll actually get a number which will give you an estimate of how much you should be paying a minimum for the agency's engagement with you for a month. There's no top end to it. I wouldn't put that in there, because there are some agencies with star designers and all that, and it's not like you can find another substitute, right? So that whatever they're charging is the price that you're gonna have to pay. But I also must add that the alternative path of going and looking for freelancers, putting 4 freelancers together and having them execute this will not yield same success as one might imagine. It's not a plug and play. There are cultures and processes and attitudes that are built within agencies, and that's not something that you can just recreate by just hiring freelancers and putting them together. So that's not going to happen. All right, the last bit, agreements and contracts. So you've hired the right agency. Now just make sure that there are these clauses that are there in the contract that you set up with them. So first of all, make sure that the scope has been captured there. So the scope has got to do with what all they're going to be designing for you. Like let's say it's another e-commerce site. You're going to have a browsing section, you'll have a search function, you'll have a way for the the customers to actually type in their addresses, blah blah blah. There's all these features that's going to be designed by the agency. So make sure that that scope has been covered. The next thing that you want to make sure is, from your perspective, make sure that you know what format they're going to be delivering their work with. If it's acceptable to you, that's great. Otherwise, make the right suggestion and make sure that that is clearly clearly a point that you've discussed. And what you don't want to be in is in a situation of surprise where they're gonna work with the tools that they normally work with, but it absolutely does not work for you or your dev team that you might have hired to execute this project. So just make sure that that's a conversation you've had ahead of time. I typically love working with new agencies on a fixed cost basis initially. And this is very useful because the fixed cost keeps everybody on their toes, the agency definitely on their toes, because what they don't want to do is actually to be in a place where they take too long to execute the project and actually have to burn money on their side in order to make a profit. So they will actually try to to deliver the project ahead of schedule, because that ends up meaning a greater profit to them. And that's a good place for you to be in as a client as well. If they can meet the deadlines and get you the things ahead of schedule, nothing like it. So that's what I would suggest that you do in the beginning. You don't want to be on a time and materials contract initially, especially when you're working with a new agency. My long-term engagements in my previous agency was with clients that I had initially worked with on a project basis and then converted to a time and materials basis, because as an agency I wanted to understand the culture of the company, and as a company they wanted to understand whether I could deliver on the promise that I had initially made by pitching to them and such. So it's a win-win for both to engage on a fixed cost basis in the beginning. Definitely make sure that the IP that they're going to deliver to you is owned by you. This is, I mean, most contracts are work for hire, so the IP ownership is implied. But if you can just mention within that engagement that any IP that is developed as a part of this project belongs to you, right? So you want to be able to utilize that and build other versions in the future and such. So just make sure that that clause actually allows you to be able to take it that way. Quite often it happens that non-disclosure agreements are not signed with the agencies, but I would ask you to do this just so that you can have an open conversation with the agency as well. You need to be able to discuss some details about your business so that they are building the right solution for you, right? And you don't want to be in a place where you're not disclosing something and they design the wrong thing and it cannot be executed because of this thing that you didn't mention, and situations like that. So, and also because many of your team members also need to be having conversations, you cannot guide exactly who should say what and such. Get a blanket protection by having this NDA in place. So that'll actually facilitate a much better execution of a project. And clients don't often think about this, but even design agencies need to provide support, because not everything can be documented, and you'd be spending a lot of time just documenting stuff if you went down that path. But what is often an easier method is to actually call up the agency and have that designer explain how a particular module works or anything like that. Or you might want your dev team members to actually reach out to the design team and actually have a conversation as to how to execute a particular function. And if something has been designed which cannot be implemented by the dev team in a certain way, the design team might actually have another solution, so the dev team can reach out and get that revised solution sent out to them to execute. So make sure that the support clauses are also covered. So what you want to understand is how much support you're going to get during the project and just post the execution of the project. But also, if you needed support at a later point, what are the terms for getting that support as well? So just make sure this clause is also covered. So that's basically it. I think at this particular point you would have made the right choice of choosing the right agency. So just know that it isn't about the ranking or anything like that. It's about the way that agency and your company can actually fit together. That will actually produce the magic that you want. Okay, so I wish you all the best, and if you're ever stuck, do reach out to me. I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. So I look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Cheers.